Some people do not go treasure hunting. They go to bury their greed in the ground. And sometimes, what rises from the earth is not gold. Sometimes, something else comes home first. This story begins near an old graveyard. According to what was told, a group of men went there late at night to dig for buried treasure. The place had a bad name for years. Older people used to say that no one digs there alone, even if he thinks he does. But that night, none of them cared. As the digging got deeper, the air began to change. The wind stopped. The night grew heavy. Even the sound of the soil changed. Each time the shovel struck the ground, it felt as if something beneath them was answering back. One of the men wanted to stop. The other shut him down. Because when greed grows just a little bigger than fear, a man begins to dig his own ending. Then it happened. One of the men lost his balance. His foot drove hard into the soft earth beside the pit, and the moment it did, his face changed. He froze. He did not pull his foot back right away. It was as if whatever was under the soil had moved beneath him. Then he jerked backward. He pulled his leg free, took one step back, then another. But he could not stop staring at the place where he had stepped. What happened? They asked him. His mouth had gone dry. When he finally spoke, his voice barely came out. Something crushed under my foot. A few seconds later, a thin sound came from the darkness near the graveyard. It was not a child. It was not an animal. It was not the wind. It was sharp, broken, small, but full of rage. Everyone heard it, and no one spoke after that. They left the dig exactly where it was. The earth remained open. They took nothing with them. But one of them did not come back empty-handed. When the man got home, he was still speaking, still answering questions, still walking like himself. But his wife noticed something immediately. It was not fear. It was absence. The man who came home looked the same, but something inside him no longer sat in the same place. The first night, nothing happened. He lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. His eyes stayed open. He pretended to sleep, but he did not sleep. Just before dawn, his wife watched his lips move in the dark. He was whispering, as if someone in the room was whispering back, but there was no one there. The second night, everything began. Just after midnight, he sat upright in bed. His eyes were wide open. He was not blinking. He was barely breathing. His wife thought his heart had stopped. Then he raised his head, slowly, too slowly, and too far back. His throat stretched, his jaw trembled, and when the first sound came out of him, his wife screamed, because it was not his voice. It came from somewhere deeper, much deeper, as if something dark inside his chest had reached upward and borrowed his mouth. At first, it sounded like a man. Then, it bent into the cry of a child. Then, it split, as if two voices were trying to speak through the same body. His hands locked, the veins in his neck rose, his teeth shook, and right in front of her eyes, parts of his face began to darken. The skin around his neck, his chest, his shoulders. It was not bruising, it was not a burn. It looked as if darkness itself had been pressed beneath his skin.
But the worst part had not happened yet, because then he lifted off the bed. No one touched him, no one pulled him, and still his body rose. His back arched upward. His feet scraped against the mattress. His spine bent like it was being dragged toward the ceiling. His wife later said he hung there for a few seconds. Only a few. But sometimes a few seconds are enough to ruin a mind forever. The next morning, the dark marks were still there, and during the day he barely spoke. When he did speak, his sentences broke apart. Sometimes he answered normally. Sometimes he called people by names that were not theirs. Sometimes he turned toward the corner of the room and went silent as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. The third night was worse. This time he did not sit up. He woke staring straight at the ceiling. Then he began to laugh. It was dry, low, broken. It did not sound human. It sounded like something trying to imitate laughter without fully understanding how people do it. His wife tried to leave the room. The moment she moved, he turned toward her. His eyes were not black, not in that way, but there was something behind them, something that looked at her as if it already knew her. Then, in that damaged voice, he said, "You did not wake me. You woke her." After that night, no one wanted to be alone with him. By day, he was getting worse. His hands were freezing cold. His face looked sunken. At times, his voice changed without warning. Some words came out like a child. Some came out old. Some came out as if his throat were no longer his own. And at night, his body stopped belonging to him. One evening, the family tied him to the bed. They had no choice. Earlier that day, he had started choking himself in the middle of the house. 4 men had to pull his hands away from his throat, so they tied his wrists, they tied his ankles, they ran rope through the corners of the bed frame. Near midnight, a sound came from the room. When they opened the door, he was sitting upright, still tied. Every rope was still tight. His wrists were still bound, but he was sitting upright, as if the ropes were not holding him down, as if he were allowing them to stay. He slowly turned his head. He looked at every person in the room, one by one. Then he said one of their names, but the voice did not belong to any age, any person, any living mouth they knew. It sounded wet, cold, almost buried. 2 people ran from the room. One of them ran outside without even putting on his shoes, because the tied man had suddenly thrown himself forward, and the bed had dragged across the floor with him. No one had touched him, no one had lifted him, and still something had moved him. That was when the family called a spiritual healer. An old man came. The moment he stepped into the house, he stopped. He stood still for a few seconds, then said, he did not come back alone. They led him into the room. The man was lying motionless on the bed. His eyes were closed. The healer sat beside him and began to recite. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the man's eyes opened, not slowly, not naturally. They opened as if something inside him had kicked them open from behind. The healer continued. The man's jaw tightened, his lips trembled, his throat stretched. Then the first sentence came, "You are late." The room changed the moment those words were spoken. His wife later said the air turned as cold as a grave. The healer did not stop. He asked who was there. He asked why they had come. He asked what they wanted. At first, all that came was laughter. Then the man's mouth opened again, and a voice answered,
He stepped on it.
The healer asked, "What?" This time the answer came harder, sharper.
My child.
No one in the room moved after that. No one spoke. The healer raised his voice and kept reciting. The man's body began to convulse. The dark marks across his skin grew deeper. Then more voices came. One sounded like a child, one sounded furious, one sounded old, one sounded like it was crying. It was as if several things were taking turns behind the same face. After a long struggle, the healer forced out what had happened. The man had stepped into an unseen boundary near the graveyard. The thing he felt under his foot was believed to be the child of one of the Jinn, and the beings attached to him were not just one. They belonged to a Jinn clan called Kuhena. When the healer said that name out loud, the room went still, because this no longer sounded like a simple haunting. This was not one presence. This was rage. This was blood. This was revenge. The healer stayed through the night. He did not leave. He recited until morning while the man screamed, cursed, wept like a child, then spoke in voices that were not his own. At one point they said scratching came from under the bed. No one looked. The second night was worse. As the recitation continued, the man began to vomit.
What came out was thick, dark, almost black. The smell filled the room and would not leave. Then he collapsed. When he woke again, he did not know his own mother. He looked at his wife and smiled, but it was not the smile of a husband. The healer said this was not release. This was resistance. The third night became a war. As the recitation grew louder, the room reacted. The light went out more than once. The curtain moved, though the window was shut. The man arched like a bow on the bed. Then, without opening his eyes, he spoke again. This time, the voice sounded closer, not from his throat, from lower, as if something beneath the bed were speaking through him.
We will not let him go.
The healer did not stop. Hours passed. Then suddenly, the man fell limp. His body loosened, his jaw dropped, his face emptied. The room went silent. So silent that for a moment they thought they had all gone deaf. Then the healer stood and quietly said, "They left, but not all of them left willingly." The next morning, the man woke normal. His voice was his own again. His eyes were calm. For the first time in days, he drank water without shaking. The family cried. They thought it was over. Before leaving, the healer stopped at the door and said, "If you hear a voice at night, do not answer it." The first few days were quiet. The house calmed. The man ate again. He slept. His wife finally breathed. And that is why what came next was worse. Because sometimes what leaves does not slam the door. Sometimes it leaves something behind. Weeks passed. One night, the man and his wife were asleep together. Sometime after midnight, the woman heard a very small sound. At first, she thought she had dreamed it. Then she heard it again. It was coming from under the bed, thin, broken, like the muffled laugh of a child. She froze. Slowly, she leaned over the edge of the bed and looked down. There was nothing there. The moment she lifted her head, she saw that her husband's eyes were open. He was staring at the ceiling. He did not move. She called his name. No answer. Then, very slowly,
He turned his head toward her. His face looked calm, too calm, and with a voice quieter than a whisper, he said, "This time, I did not come back alone." Before she could move, the bedroom door slowly shut on its own. Then the small laugh came again, closer, clearer.
And in that moment, she realized something worse than before. His voice was normal now, but there were two breaths in the room.